Thank you.
Thank you. I think when we go to tab 6 and we look at map 6A, this is an example of a county-initiated rezoning. The areas just outside the bypass, it's the primary road serving this area is Old Ocean City Road, and to the south you see US Route 50. This area is currently zoned as A1 zoning district. However, as anyone knows that has either grown up in this area or ridden by it, it is somewhat densely residentially developed, as well as there are quite a few commercial uses in this region. So this is an area that the staff, as well as the Planning Commission's recommended for rezoning. Moving over to map 6B. The area to the south is going to be rezoned or potentially rezoned to R20, which is consistent with the uses that are towards that, which are more residentially dominated, and it doesn't really afford a whole lot of commercial uses. However, as you're moving back westward towards the area of the bypass and Old Ocean City Road, the recommendation is to go to what is known as light business and residential, or LB2 zoning district, because you do have quite a few retail and employment uses in this region. And by going to the light business and residential, it removes any nonconformity or inconsistency, as well as offers potential retail vendors the ability to maybe expand their operations at this time.
So this would solve Fat Boy's problem.
Would solve Fat Boy's problem. So
Potential problem.
but not only Fat Boys, but any retail establishment that's maybe looking to expand their use or intensity. It could be a wayside farmer's market right now, and let's say they wanted to have a restaurant.
Yeah.
Well, under its current zoning, they would not be permitted by right or special exception.
When would this happen, if this happened?
Well, that's something we'll talk about with process. First, we'll get through this. All the changes will be made to the land use plan. This would happen as a function of after the adoption of the comprehensive plan. We are in discussions currently about trying to maybe simultaneously go ahead and adopt the comprehensive plan, and subsequently what we refer to as the zoning map amendment, which these changes would take effect as a result of that. However, we're just in preliminary discussions at this time.
We thought that would make a great deal of sense, because over the last 10 months or so, as part of the poultry debate, you've really had quite a lot of exercise in zoning. So as soon as the comprehensive plan is adopted, then if you segue right over and address the zoning code, you'll cut a year to a year and a half off of the process.
And it really helps to ensure continuity. That's what you're striving for between your comprehensive plan land use and your county zoning.
How do you determine what, I'm looking here, you're getting into a pretty rural area here. How do you determine these lines, I guess?
That's again, a very good question. There's a fine art when it's in a city or town's plan. It's easy because they've identified the area of interest. What we do is try to look at the predominant use in the area now and to see what type of future considerations may be down the line. So when you look at the area that's brought in as light business and residential, you'll notice also that that area expands into the corner of Old Ocean City and Zion Church Road. Because of the traffic volume along those two roadways, it lends itself to future commercial uses. Not to say that residential would be incompatible there. However, the market will ultimately dictate the final use. So we're trying to provide some flexibility, that you're not locked into one specific type of use on a piece of land where it's appropriate.
Right.
And also another point that kind of goes along with that, if you notice, with the exception of Willard's, which is somewhat of an anomaly, excuse me, we don't look at zoning from a piecemeal standpoint. We're not picking out one property. We didn't think that, oh, well, we know this property owner wants to expand their use. What's better for the region? And that helps to ensure the compatibility.
I guess my next question is, why have you got this separated in two blocks? 6A.
Right there?
Yeah, you got this block and this block.
Unfortunately, I'm not the best at mapping, and I took on this mapping exercise.
Okay.
So if I didn't do that as a different block and it was all one block, it starts cutting Old Ocean City Road off.
Okay, all right.
Merely mapping, whereas if you look at 6B, you'll notice you don't see any of the road network or lot lines. I'm not proposing as part of this plan that we're changing any lot lines, that we're changing any roads. Again, it was a mapping limitation, that's all.
That's fine.
Again, this is one example of a county initiating a zoning request, not a city or town. Another area, we talked about one commercial entity that we're looking at in a broader sense of doing some proposed rezonings is when you go to map 7A. This is the area along Nanticoke Road, Brick Kiln Road, and Old Quantico Road, I believe, to the north. Since the late 1980s, this area has experienced a lot of tremendous residential growth. As a result of that, the county is initiating or requesting your consideration looking at potentially rezoning these properties. As they are currently depicted, they are zoned as R8 residential. When you ride out that way, looking at Nanticoke Road, there are some commercial establishments there by special exception now, because ideally with a residential zoning district, you're looking for residential to be the primary use. And also there's great interest that's been expressed over the past 6 years about some of the properties fronting on the Nanticoke Road side of the proposed area for zoning change of going to a retail use. Because of its ideal location along a major state roadway, that is probably a higher and better use than residential. In addition, it will eliminate the residential, let me back. It will still permit residential uses if ultimately it is rezoned as reflected in map 7B, which is going back to the light business and residential zoning district. This is another example where we look at the existing uses and what the future demand could be and try to blend the two together so we're not creating non-conforming or incompatible uses. So by going to this zoning designation in this area, it will expand commercial uses to, such as a bank, barbershop, neighborhood and community scale commercial, not regional commercial like you would see on Route 13 North, but as well as home-based businesses and allowing for the existing residential uses without it becoming a non-conforming use. So a little bit of housekeeping, but also a little bit of opening up the area based on what it could really support. No questions? Let's see. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk about map 8A and 8B. This really gets into conformity. This is the area between Marvel Road and Harford Road, just west of West Zion Road. This area is currently zoned I-2 light industrial, which does not permit residential uses. One of the predominant uses in this area is either residential or home-based business, in addition to a little bit of commercial. However, it never really developed into the area of light industrial that it was anticipated to develop into as 2004. So when you go to map 8B, forwarding to what the future zoning would be based off our recommendations, you see the area along Marvel Road going to commercial, which fits again with the unity of the current neighborhood and what we project, as well as the area to the south, going back to that light business and residential. We don't want to do anything from a zoning standpoint where if someone has a business today, they're not going to be in compliance tomorrow or when this goes into effect. We're very sensitive to that. However, by going into this light business and residential, all those single-family homes, their non-conforming status therefore is removed because that is a permitted use in this region. It's kind of an overview of some of the things we look at with zoning considerations. I think it gives a fair sampling of how you try to take and respect a city and town's comprehensive plan as one function for proposed zoning amendments, how you try to take a change or intensification of development in a region as one consideration, and as well as those areas where we're anticipating projected growth based on the supporting and future amenities serving an area. Staff's available to answer any questions you may have. This does reflect all the incorporated jurisdictions changes. with the exception of Salisbury. Salisbury's on a little bit of a different scale. Going to take a little more time to prepare those maps. However, the approach is always going to be the same. You'll see that a lot of areas that the metro core communities of Del Mar, Fruitland, and Salisbury take into their growth area, for the most part, are areas of existing development. Therefore, a lot of times the zoning that the county has already put on these properties is going to be consistent with what a city or town is looking for as far as a future growth area. And there'll be some sporadic areas that are going to be designated for growth as part of their plans that are currently undeveloped. I think Fruitland is probably the prime example of that. And it goes back to the poultry discussion again, given the familiarity of council. It's at times very convenient for staff to try to use that to describe what we're looking at. I recall distinctly when council was going over where these poultry houses were going to be permitted by right versus where they were going to be permitted by special exception. That lent itself to the discussion of the different types of growth areas between the small incorporated jurisdictions and those within the metro core. And specifically, I remember these properties coming up south of Fruitland in the growth area. And what do we do about those? Because they're currently zoned as town transition, which, again, we were looking at things differently, that if you're in the metro core, that it seemed like the intent was a special exception would be needed for a poultry operation.
I guess one of the questions, if you look at the Del Mar maps,
Indeed. Please.
Where the Ocean Highway is, I know there's a concentration of people wanting, and I know Delegate Anderson has talked about, you know, how trying to get businesses into that area, why Del Mar hasn't used more of that land on 13 as a proposed area for rezoning.
That's a very good question. Again, that would be something that the town of Del Mar is going to have to look at with any consideration, regardless of where it's at, adjacent to the town, of do they have the ability to serve it? That's going to be a primary question, as Jack alluded to at the last meeting. Back, prior to, or in 2004, the cities and towns all had very large growth areas. Well, back then, they didn't have to identify that they would be able to serve them. Now, under new planning law throughout the state, they have to demonstrate that they can serve these regions. However, from a county perspective, we're trying to open up that, and the town did take a considerable swing at it when you look more along Bi-State Boulevard. In the area of Bi-State Boulevard around Driftwood and Mariner, a lot of that, as you'll see on map 10A, is currently zoned, well, that's zoned general commercial, so we made commercial and tried to bring in their existing housing there. The property at the corner of Stage Road and Ocean Highway, I believe that was currently zoned R20 residential zoning only, and it's been jumped up as proposed to general commercial. One of the things the town did not do as part of their comprehensive plan update was take any of the property located along US Route 13 and propose a downzoning to it. So while they were conservative about what growth they wanted, both within their town as well as outside their town, they were also very cognizant to understand the potentials for more commercial opportunity. And you're going to see that. Just to the property south that I mentioned on Stage Road is Pond's Edge subdivision, I believe. They've got another 168 apartment units going in there, and I think somewhere between 30 and 40,000 square feet of retail space as well. So again, being a primary commercial corridor, one of the things we do not want to do is inadvertently intensify the land use of that area, more residential based, which really isn't compatible with the transportation network, nor is it the highest and best use of the land.
Also on your map 10B, you didn't include town transitional in your legend.
Yes, and that's, thank you. There's a reason for that, because I only included under the areas on the B map suite, I only included the zoning districts that are recommended as part of the rezonings.
Okay. All right.
Just because there's about 15 zoning districts, and I really tried to bore down into what we're looking at and what's being proposed without having a lot of filler.
Sounds good.
A question on the chapter 7. On 7.6, it makes a notation here that the town transition zoning district will be eliminated from the county zoning code, and the county zoning map will be amended accordingly based on the land use plan.
That's where we were at in 2010 as a result of recent text amendments, chicken houses.
Right.
We're moving away from that approach.
So this will no, because this is,
This
is,
will-
Modified.
This will be scrubbed
Yes.
from the planner, modified as Jack said.
okay,
In addition, we will be preparing, once we figure out the zonings, and we go back and we modify the land use plan, the land use plan will also now have a category moving forward called town transition or town growth. That's going to be very consistent, well, it's going to be consistent with the town transition zoning areas. Problem is right now, when you look at land use, residential isn't called out by the R districts, the R8, the R15, the R20. It's not called out by town transition. Instead, it uses more generalized terms like low-density residential, medium-density residential. So given your familiarity with zoning, we'd like to just stick with zoning following through this discussion. And as Mr. Kramer said, that tees us up very nice for the zoning map amendment.
okay. And you still, there's mention in there also in the ag district 1 and 3, and, 1 and 15, et
I
cetera,
was
et
not
cetera.
going to use 1, 3, 7, 5, 15, or any of those today. We are not proposing any recommended zoning changes to the density of the A1 zoning district.
Okay, but that still doesn't really exist, does it, with the
It-
mandates from the
Well,
state level?
it exists, but it's overlaid in effect with the septic bill.
Shouldn't that be noted in here? Because if you read this, it makes it seem as if the 1, 3, and 115 is the way it is, and yet, shouldn't there be some,
Well, an example of that would be that you could have property, say, in the critical area that appears to be zoned ag and allow 1 per 3. While you have another criteria that kind of overlays that. Well, ultimately, your tier map will do the same thing. So you're gonna have, multiple jurisdictions that you're right, kind of go on top of each other. Just like the health department itself, whether the property can perk or not.
To go back to your question, yes. We can add language that makes it explicitly clear the difference of zoning, and as Jack just described, an overlay, which going to the tier is a state mandated overlay.
Right.
I think very suitable for what we're looking at here, because it does get rather confusing, but at the end of the day, base zoning is where you start off to calculate your density. The number of lots you ultimately achieve will be a function of that, and then apply the overlays on whether critical area, the growth tier map, or whatever may come next. So I think moving forward, I'm seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. I hope it's not a train. I hope it's the finish line. Staff is going to go ahead and start doing the final modifications to the plan text based off conversations we've had over the past year. And we'd like to go ahead and get the plan ready when council's comfortable with these proposed zoning map amendments for public hearing. This document has been vetted at over 70 public meetings, whether the Planning Commission, the County Council, or public meetings in general on the east side of the county, the west side of the county, the central side. We're producing a document that's consistent with the cities and towns. It's taken into consideration the housekeeping that goes on since 2004 in the zoning map, and looking to supply adequate areas to accommodate future growth and development. I think at some point, it's very important that it's very important that we hear what the public has to say about this. 6 to 8 years ago when we started working on it, this room would have been full. Today, as a result of both state legislation, which is very restrictive on development, as well as working with the communities and individual citizens, we have a draft comprehensive plan that I feel is truly ready to be vetted from that public hearing function. However, it will take probably about 2 to 3 weeks for the finalization to occur. and we'll wait for council's nod when to start setting that schedule.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Any other questions?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you. This time, we were going to break for lunch.
You want to do Mr. Young while we're,
Excuse me?
you want to do Mr. Young while we're here?
No, I see he just came in, but we haven't done lunch yet. I mean, I go all day, I don't care, but I think there are council members that want to break for lunch. Thank you. You guys are welcome to join us if you want.
Small fee.
All right?
Can you give us about 20, 30 minutes?
Hey, young man.
They'll listen to it when they're not starved.